Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Adam and Eve. Go to adamandeve.com and use code MIDNIGHT for 50% off one item plus free shipping in the US and Canada. Before I start, I should say that this video will feature some spoilers for Hawkeye. If I asked a casual Spider-Man movie fan to name some of Peter Parker's most well-known villains, my guess is the list would be fairly predictable and would definitely feature the Green Goblin, Venom, and Doc Ock. I would be a little surprised to see the Kingpin come up, at least in those first 5 or 6 names. That's not to say that Wilson Fisk is an obscure character. I actually think he's been seen outside of comics and live action far more than, say, Mysterio. But I still think he occupies a pretty unique space in Spider-Man's rogues gallery, because many of the people watching this won't think of him as a Spider-Man character at all, but as maybe the central antagonist of Daredevil, occupying a much darker place in the Marvel Universe than someone like Doc Ock usually does. It's this tug of war that the character has, between his origins in Amazing Spider-Man and being made more complex in the pages of Daredevil, that has given us the fascinating amalgamation that is modern Wilson Fisk. And of course, Vincent D'Onofrio, who made such a big impact in Netflix's Daredevil, has returned to the role in Hawkeye. And although things ended very ambiguously for him, my guess is that this won't be the last time we see his take on the Kingpin of crime. So I just felt like devoting a whole video to him, where I can talk about where the character came from, as well as where I can see him fitting into the MCU going forward. Especially now that Daredevil and the other Netflix shows are getting a boost in visibility thanks to their release on Disney+.
Where is the other one?
Right here, Kingpin, and the name's Daredevil.
You would have to be a daredevil to dare to challenge me.
So, okay, I would not call Kingpin one of the best Spider-Man villains of the 60s, but I will give him this. He was introduced in an iconic issue, number 50, known to fans everywhere as the Spider-Man No More story. In that issue, Kingpin uses the fact that Spider-Man has disappeared to his advantage, expanding his empire rapidly. The Wilson Fisk we meet here is really simplistic compared to the more layered character that would come later, but there is some really important groundwork laid. The most obvious is his look. He was drawn by John Romita, who was the Amazing Spider-Man artist after Steve Ditko quit, and someone who had actually proved himself first on a successful run on Daredevil, pre-Frank Miller. And it was in issue 50 that Romita became bored of the prospect of having to draw yet another crime boss. By then, they were a really old comic book cliche, usually looking like a thin guy in a fedora and a suit, maybe a mustache. Romita knew that he wanted Kingpin to be a physical threat for Spidey, so he created a massive barrel of a man, with his looks largely based on actor Sidney Greenstreet, who is probably best known today for playing the club owner Ferrari in Casablanca. Apart from his look, there was one other important element that would define Kingpin going forward: the idea that Fisk wants to run crime exactly like a business. It was the look and this motivation that would go on to be the basis for all the more emotionally complex turns that the character would go through in the future. But part of what I find so interesting about Fisk is that this original Spider-Man-based version of him still exists. Depending on the story being told and the age demographic being targeted, Kingpin can easily revert back to being a very straightforward crime lord who is constantly flustered by Spider-Man's wisecracks. But of course, that's not all he is. Starting with Frank Miller's run on Daredevil, he began to take on new dimensions. Honestly, when done right, I really think Kingpin is interesting enough to sustain his own book. I'm annoyed they haven't given him a solo title, but he's great in stuff like Punisher Max Kingpin from 2010, where he really managed to overshadow Frank Castle. Netflix's Daredevil, while not without its flaws, really nailed Wilson Fisk. Vincent D'Onofrio has to be one of the most unique actors working today, and having him in the role goes a long way towards making Fisk much more than the cliché crime lord that John Romita was trying to avoid all those years ago. But I have to be honest, I don't think his scenes in Hawkeye measured up to Daredevil. Which makes sense, he didn't have all that much to do in a series that felt overstuffed with a meager 6 episodes to work with. It was fun that his outfit here referenced the decent Spidey graphic novel family business, but the actual material he had to play was pretty bare bones. So when I found out that a lot of his scenes ended up on the cutting room floor, I really wasn't surprised. Still, I'm hoping for a more substantial role for him in the future, and D'Onofrio seems to think that will happen, saying, "I think the different tones are obvious. We talked about it, and for me, it's not a worry. Because if I ever get the chance to take it farther with the MCU, then I'm gonna do the same work I did on Daredevil, like I did in Hawkeye. Fisk is about emotional brutality, and he's just a mess. He's a broken monster, and he's capable of many different kinds of brutality. So none of that worried me during Hawkeye." This quote definitely seems to think that Fisk is returning post-Hawkeye, which I really want to be true, especially with the rumors of a Daredevil revival starring Charlie Cox. And really, after his appearance in No Way Home, that just makes perfect sense to me. I did kinda want to linger on No Way Home for a minute, because while that Matt Murdock cameo was small, it could be pretty significant. Anyone who really regularly watches my channel knows that wanting D'Onofrio as Kingpin in a Spider-Man movie has kind of been a hobby horse of mine for a while. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Aside from the fact that Kingpin is maybe my favorite Marvel villain, I also think these specific takes on the character would go together incredibly well. Holland's Spider-Man would be so irritating to this Kingpin, who both takes himself super seriously and often has the temperament of a child. I really think watching Holland play off of that volatility would just be a recipe for great scenes. What the Kingpin has built for himself in New York means everything to Wilson Fisk. It was the result of years of bloodshed and brutally strategic thinking. To see all of that threatened by some loudmouth kid would definitely drive him pretty crazy. I've always felt that D'Onofrio's Fisk was emotionally trapped at the age he murdered his dad with a hammer. He can't help but take everything personally, to the point where he uses brutal violence to hide the fact that he's kind of on the edge of tears a lot. That's not really the type of person that Holland's Spider-Man has encountered before, and I think it would be a great fit. Of course, this Kingpin's main connection is with Daredevil, and I hope if they do actually bring the two of them back in a show, that they're not forced to make the characters more family-friendly than they were on the Netflix version. I'm kind of hopeful that won't be the case though, since, at least in the US, Disney Plus just prompted its users to opt into R-rated content, giving us access to shows like The Punisher. If they're okay with that show remaining on their platform unedited, I have to think they'd understand the benefits of letting Daredevil continue to be a grittier crime show as well. To viewers outside of the US, it may seem weird that I'm talking about the platform primarily being for kids and families, since you all have had things like the Star add-on and have been able to watch R-rated movies like The Last Duel for a while. But over here, the R-rated content is a pretty new thing. I mean, this is the platform that scrapped an already filmed Lizzie McGuire revival because they thought it was a bit too adult. Until recently, Disney's mindset in the US has basically been stuff for adults on Hulu, family-friendly stuff on Disney+. That seems to be changing with the help of some smart parental control features, so hopefully we can start seeing Disney Plus shows that appeal to all sorts of different niches, including shows and movies aimed at an older crowd. Something tells me that it won't be too long until Hulu itself is folded into the platform as well, bringing a lot of FX shows with it, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I have waited for this for some time.
What do you have in mind? A pie-eating contest?
In the end, I think there's just so much potential left untapped with D'Onofrio's Wilson Fisk. When reading interviews with the actor, it's clear that he spent a lot of time thinking through the psychology and physicality of the character, and it really paid off. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that his Kingpin is the best thing to come out of the Marvel Netflix era, and I really hope he eventually gets the spotlight he deserves. But I want to know what you think. Do you think the Kingpin should come back, or is Hawkeye a good endpoint for him? Also, do you want them to open the floodgates for all the Netflix characters to come back? Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Punisher, Luke Cage? Like, how much more of them do you really want to see? Oh, and if you want to like this video, it would really help it get shown to more people. So all that said, I'm really interested to read your comments, because Kingpin is a huge favorite of mine, and I hope to see the big guy attacking henchmen with a big fancy cane sometime soon.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.